Welcome to the third installment of the Modern Times podcast. We have our established panel here,
Hello.
Hi.
Sarah again,
Hi.
and Anne.
Hi.
And today we're going to be talking about the Essanay period of Chaplin's career. But there's a lot of interesting things to talk about. But first, we want to get into the comments from last episode that we had, which was, have you ever been to a Chaplin live screening or event? And the fans were overwhelmingly in agreement that that's definitely a cool way to get people into Chaplin, is to take them to a live event. And they had some stories to tell. So, Sarah, why don't you read one of those for us off the Facebook page?
Let's see. H.T. Ellis said, I went to one around his birthday with my friend Trish last April. There was a mixture of his films. It was great to see everyone from the elderly to children there, and we were all laughing. Seeing a silent comedy with an audience is like nothing else. You notice things about the film you didn't think were funny before. You also catch yourself laughing at other people's laughs. It's a magical moment, one that I recommend everyone should go after if they get the opportunity.
That's great, that's great. And it's really true, too. What I've noticed on here is that Bruce Burbank Lawton Jr.'s Chaplin shoes, hat, and cane have certainly made the rounds, because everyone's posting photos of them wearing the hat and holding the cane and the shoes, which actually have his autograph on it.
It's interesting. If you watch the restored Gold Rush, if I'm not mistaken, you can actually see Bruce Burbank Lawton's name in there as being part of the restoration. So he's like a big silent film historian.
Yeah, I met him at the Chaplin event in Zanesville, Ohio in 2010, and he was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Really cool guy, really knowledgeable. What shocked me was he is perfectly willing to share it with anyone who wants to take a photo of it, wants to hold it. Anybody who wants to be a part of that in those pieces from Chaplin's history. And I was shocked because I know personally, if I had had those in my collection, they would not go anywhere. They would stay in the house in a glass case. But I really have to commend him because, he's willing to share that with other fans. And that's really what it's all about.
He's really nice. I mean, I just know him from Facebook, but, he comments on my page, and he is very knowledgeable and willing to share his stuff, information, and stuff like that, which is, is really cool. Yeah.
And do you have a comment that you want to read real quick?
Who's actually been really a big part of the page, interacting and everything. She went to a Chaplin film screening last year in Virginia on his birthday.
Oh, cool.
And she got to see The Rink and Dough and Dynamite. Composer Ben Model improvised the piano score for that.
I think it's Modell. I think is how he says it.
And actually, again, Bruce Lawton was there, and he gave a history of film and then information about his particular films. And she does have pictures where she is posing with his shoes and his hat. Obviously, he brought them with him, and she was able to stand near his shoes, which I can't even imagine.
What a tremendous experience. I'm really jealous of that.
Oh, yes, definitely.
My goodness. Very lucky.
Ben Modell is part of our Facebook page now, too, and I posted a couple photos of him that I took at the Ohio Chaplin Conference of him playing the organ to work. I took a couple shots of him playing. It was just really cool to see, which, of course, ties into our SNA topic, but it's so great to see those short films being played, because you hardly ever see that early stuff being played to an audience, and seeing it with live music. And Ben Modell travels all over the country. I keep up with him on Facebook, and he does all these silent film events, and if you ever get a chance to see him, definitely, because you won't be disappointed. All right, so I guess we'll lead that into our discussion today, which I'll let Anne go ahead and send it off, because she seems to know a lot about this era. So, Anne, why don't you start us off on the SNA era and how it came to be?
He signed with SNA in 1914, and actually he signed with them after he left Keystone. So when he left Keystone, he hadn't had his contract, with SNA firmly entrenched.
And he left Keystone. He left Keystone because he was feeling smothered by Mack Sennett's production style of working on films, and Mack refused to pay him.
He was asking for
the money he was asking for.
$1,000 a week. And Mack Sennett was like, I don't even make it. To which Charlie said, but people are not lining up to see you. So, and he also famously, because Max Sennett said, which is true, he had people that left Keystone and ended up coming back. Ford Serling left Keystone and came back. So he was kind of saying that to Charlie, like, you're going to leave and then you're going to want to come back. To which Charlie said, all I need to make a film is a policeman, pretty girl, Park, a policeman, and a pretty girl, which he did a lot of films like that. So
That's right.
He knew. He knew.
Do you think, how quickly do you think
Probably
that Max Sennett realized his mistake?
Days or weeks of him signing his Essanay contract.
Right.
The interesting thing about the contract is he asked for, he was asking for around $1,000. They gave him $1,250 a week.
Yeah.
But a rumor went around that he was looking for a $10,000 bonus. And G.M. Anderson, who was part of Essanay, he was part of the company along with George Spohr. He said that, you know, he would talk to George Spohr, and he kind of guaranteed that he would get the bonus. The thing is, it was a rumor, and then when it went around, Charlie's like, well, I'm not saying that that I wasn't looking for it. The thing about George Spohr was Spohr tried to act like he had no idea who Charlie Chaplin was. So he was kind of, and actually when Charlie went to Chicago, he still hadn't gotten the $10,000 bonus, so he almost had to chase him down to get the, you know, the bonus.
A little background on Essanay here. According to the internet, it was founded in 1907 in Chicago by George Spohr and Gilbert Anderson.
Right.
Is that so the first was this the first movie studio in Chicago? Mm-hmm. So then they, I guess
Niles.
Later on they built one in California as well.
Didn't they just like give Chaplin his own studio? Because I don't think he really liked Chicago. He liked because the climate wasn't like what he wanted to film in. So they're like, here we have this little studio in Niles, California. You can have it. And
well, you're right. He didn't like Chicago, and I think one of the reasons, besides the brutal cold, is they kind of ran the studio like a factory.
Oh yeah.
So it wasn't much better than much better than
What
Sennett.
especially got Keystone him is they wanted lights out at 6 o'clock.
Oh no, they can't do that to Charlie.
Exactly. And when he first got there, they told him he could go to the scriptwriter to get his scripts, and he's like, "Yeah, no, I do my own." And the woman that was going to give him the script was actually Luella Parsons. Who,
oh, that's funny.
Yeah, and so then he did his new job, which is actually filmed inside of the studio.
Well, let's hold up there for a second, because so he signed with Essanay. He left Keystone, and the beginning of 1915, he moved to the Essanay company. What made him leave California for the Chicago studio? Was it because they offered him more
control over his films? I think he was allowed to direct.
In Niles, what's his name? Bronco Billy really had a foothold in that. You know, he was a big star with Essanay. And I think when Charlie did go to Niles, I think he had to share the studio with Bronco Billy. They did give him a studio when he went to Los Angeles. And I think in Niles, like I said, he was having to share it with Bronco Billy, and it just wasn't, working out.
Yeah.
So,
And Bronco Billy, he made Westerns, and that wasn't what Chaplin was doing. He was making little comedies. And I think the difference in genres made it difficult for filming at the same time.
Right, right.
So as far as I know, his new job was the only Essanay filmed in Chicago. Is that correct? So as soon as he finished filming his new job, do you know what happened, Anne? Did he call him up and say, absolutely not, this is not going to work?
I think part of it is, the weather. I don't think he liked the studio, the factory atmosphere. Yeah. He needed more control. So he ended up going, back to Niles.
Ironically enough, that Essanay Studios in Chicago still stands, and I'm not sure what they do there exactly. I think it was a gym or something at one point, but there's a video on YouTube of somebody going into the studio in like 2001, 2002, and all the exterior is all still there. It still says Essanay, and they have a little I think they have a little plaque on
Yes.
one of the buildings saying that
I think it
Chaplin
kind of
filmed
prides
a
itself.
movie there. But I would love for that to be restored and turned into some sort of museum. I mean, not just for Chaplin, but for
I
all
was
the
in
Essanay
Chicago a
stars.
few years ago visiting the Sears Tower. Oh, I'm sorry, it's called the Willis Tower now. Sears Tower in my heart.
No, it's not. It's the
And
Sears Tower.
at the top where like you can like stand over the ledge or whatnot, they have a big like circular like timeline about different things in Chicago, like television, music, all sorts of things about Chicago, politics, and the movie section, like movies filmed in Chicago or about Chicago, and going all the way back to Essanay, and they have a brief thing about Chaplin being there, which I thought was kind of neat. And I think Chicago prides itself as Chaplin being there too.
That's cool when you think about it, though, because he only did one film there and he absolutely hated it. But at the same time, they put him on all this stuff, which is cool, you know, because as history rolls forward, all that kind of negative stuff kind of gets erased, and all people know of is, hey, Chaplin made a film here. It makes it sound like such a bigger deal than it actually was. You know, maybe he filmed Modern Times or something in Chicago, but no, it was just one little two-reeler that he didn't really,
like, oh, he passed
wasn't
through
too
my
fond
hometown or
of and
something
kind of
like that.
moved
It's
on.
like he was there for a minute or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so he moves back to Niles, California, and starts up work again with Essanay at the Niles Studio. And the second film he makes is A Night Out. Again, Ben Turpin is involved, but there's someone very unique that enters the picture in this
that I
aspect of
think
Chaplin's
does
career.
not get the respect that she might get the respect, but she doesn't get the notoriety she deserves. Does Edna Purviance? I don't think Chaplin would have ever achieved what he did without her, because she literally changed how the Tramp projected himself on screen. And sometimes I think just by standing next to him, her presence definitely had an effect on him. I mean, obviously, well, not obviously, but they, really fell in love pretty quickly. So I'm sure that had, an impact too. But even after they went their separate ways romantically, she still always had that effect on him. So yes.
And she was in about, I think, 60 or so of his films. So how many?
Sorry, 34.
34. Okay, I was way off.
Yeah.
She's in a lot of his movies, and she clearly, as you said, had an effect on both him and the Tramp, both on and off the screen. And even when she would like laugh during takes. Usually Chaplin would not tolerate that sort of thing, but I think he just went along with it. He didn't really mind. So yeah, I really like Edna a lot. She did make an impact on Chaplin's films that the Tramp did as well. So.
And I think interestingly for me is the fact that, just quickly talking about his personal life, people seem to be under the impression he seemed to like just one type of woman, a small brunette, young girl, which Edna was 19, but she definitely, she was voluptuous and blonde. So, there goes that theory.
Very angelic, and sensitive, that Chaplin really admired about her. And she was, a secretary before she started the films? And I can only imagine her sheer excitement being able to make movies with the most famous man in the world. She was 19 when she started out. That's pretty cool, even back then.
So how would you compare and contrast Edna to his previous female counterpart, Mabel Normand?
I mean, one of my favorites of them together is called His Trysting Place.
Yeah.
They were very believable as a married couple as far as fighting and, then getting passionate, But she was more like one of the guys. And you know what? There's one film where he literally kicked her in the ass. I cannot imagine him doing that to Edna. Mabel was just a different type. Not as romantic, but definitely chemistry.
she was like the female Chaplin. She had more of Chaplin's characteristics versus Edna, who was more, I think Edna was more or less
a real
more
girl
realistic personality.
I think I was watching a documentary, and that's exactly how they referred to her. She was just a real girl, a girl next door.
Oh, yeah. And the thing is, in the films that she was in with Chaplin, Edna just seemed to like go along with what the tramp was doing. She let him do his thing, but at the same time wouldn't let him push her around if she got too close. Right. She'd push him.
As far as I know, Mabel and Edna were actually friends, and then they ended up being linked in the murder case.
William Desmond Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
Then a couple of years later, they were linked with this millionaire. His name is Dines. I can't think of his first name, but he was like a millionaire, and purportedly Mabel's chauffeur shot him. But again, Edna wasn't really involved, but she was at the in the area, so she was kind of linked to that as well. But definitely William Desmond Taylor, even though she lived next door to him, and her and Mabel were tight, though. They were very good friends.
Right.
Did they become friends after? I'm assuming they became friends after she started working. Edna started working with Chaplin at Essanay,
when he met her, she was living in San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
So, A Night Out is filmed, and which to me looks like... It's funny, because the first two Chaplin Essanays are almost... either remakes of earlier Keystone films, or his new job is a remake slash
Keystone, I'd say.
Parody of Keystone.
I think it was a remake. Well, and actually behind the scenes, even though it wasn't a movie studio, was Property Man, and that was a Keystone, and that was more like a stage thing, but it gave you behind the scenes of another film of Keystone's behind the scenes or in a movie studio was The Masquerader, where he ended up dressing as a woman, but he showed actually inside the Keystone Studios. So that was interesting.
I believe he dressed in drag in 3 films.
Yes.
The Masquerader, A Woman, which is an Essanay film, and I can't remember the last one. Yeah, that's the one.
And the funny thing about that is, in A Busy Day, he actually played a woman.
Yeah.
And she was like a fishwife. She was like really crude, not very attractive. So it's ironic that he played an actual woman, but when he impersonated, he was stunning.
Yeah. The thing is, he could play a pretty woman.
Yes, he could.
It's funny, he's better looking than Marie Dressler. In A Busy Day, doesn't the woman that Chaplin's portraying drown at the end of the film?
And she's like drowning, and they cut the film.
And when he's as a woman in A Woman, he really, it's the tramp being a woman. So you can still see like the tramp like being flirtatious, because that's what the tramp does. He can be pretty flirty sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Pretty feminine, and not in a stereotypically feminine way that a real woman would never do.
Right, and he seemed to flirt with both men and women.
Yeah.
He would interpret a man thinking that the man was flirting with him, and he seemed like okay with it. Not, in a homosexual way, but just almost like, yeah, I'm cute. I can see you doing that, flirting with me. Very funny.
Or
very funny.
To get something that he wants, usually like money or food.
Yes.
It's funny that he never, after he did A Woman in 1915, he never dabbled in that whole
apparently in
dressing
the
up as a
film
woman
era,
thing.
A lot of men did that. Buster Keaton dressed as a woman. Roscoe Arbuckle dressed as a woman. So I'm wondering if that was just a common thing that men dressed in drag.
It was just silly and over the top, and people liked watching it.
Something that probably carried over from the stage. But it's funny that you mentioned that, because the first 2 Essanay films definitely have links to Keystone. Mm-hmm. It was like Chaplin was still in that mode, that Keystone mode of filmmaking. And so A Night Out and his new job both feature an actor by the name of Ben Turpin. And there's a lot of debate regarding folks whether or not he was a good Chaplin, counterpart or a bad Chaplin counterpart?
But to me, he's like a knockoff Tramp. For instance, if you see them next to each other, Chaplin has a tight jacket while Ben Turpin has a very large jacket, and he crosses his eyes. Him crossing his eyes is good, though. I think that's pretty funny.
Okay.
That's his trademark,
pretty much. The thing about Ben Turpin was when he started with Essanay, Chaplin met him at Essanay in Chicago. He was also a part-time janitor, and he wasn't making a very lot of money. He definitely acknowledged that Chaplin, changed his career, just obviously being, exposed with Chaplin. So, and he was a big star with Keystone, Ben Turpin.
So did Ben Turpin leave Keystone before Charlie, or did he come to Essanay around the same time?
Before Charlie.
And he went to Keystone after he left Essanay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He was a Keystone, a star with Keystone into the 1920s. It wasn't called Keystone, but Max Sennett controlled company.
Okay.
He was a star into the 1920s, but he definitely acknowledged Charlie's, help. And I think when he died in 1940, Charlie sent like a sprig of flowers to his funeral.
I'm reading here that his famous crossed eyes look that made him famous, he actually did on accident. He only crossed as a young adult after he'd suffered an accident. Turpin was convinced that the crossed eyes were essential to his comic career. His coworker recalled that after he received any blow to the head, he made a point of looking at himself in the mirror to assure himself that they had not become uncrossed.
The crossed eyes, I think. Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a lot of debate. I've seen documentaries and read things where scholars say that they love Chaplin and Turpin together as a duo, and I've heard
nothing
the
to
absolute
do with
negative.
Ben Turpin.
No.
The thing is, Charlie was terrible to him. I mean, the Tramp beating the hell out of him in both of the films. It was it's hard to watch.
Yeah, it's a Tramp's punching bag, really.
Yeah. Oh God.
And I think
also, at him. Oh my God.
At the same time, they were both holding each other back. For me, the Tramp is better solo. Like, he's more of a independent person, but also alone. And having a second banana, partner in crime, just doesn't work for him.
To me, Ben Turpin seems like the Essanay version of Chester Conklin.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, too, that Ben Turpin was a lot older than Charlie. So when we watch these films now,
and young,
as Chaplin, to me, still looks timeless and still looks pretty modern day, even in the antique films that he's in, Ben Turpin, to me, seems like anecdote of
the thing was,
what comedy
Turpin was more into, he understood the
Chaplin
big slapstick approach, while Chaplin was trying to do more subtle, meticulous comedy that wasn't the thing yet. It was taking its time. He was still learning what to do, and I think that frustrated Ben Turpin.
I think, and please, anybody that knows about Ben Turpin, please correct me. I'm just kind of going off the cuff, but if I'm not mistaken, he purportedly was the first one to either get a custard pie in the face or to throw a custard pie.
Huh.
That's what I heard, like in 1909. I could be mistaken, but for some reason that sticks in my head.
Huh. I know. Yeah. I thought it was Keystone to do the pies first. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not sure.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I think Mabel was the first woman to have a pie in the face. And I think that film's called...
Oh, okay.
I think that film is called A Muddy Romance, and it has Ford Sterling in it.
It just seems like he's selling out when he does a pie in the face. It's not him. It doesn't... Just like doing chase scenes, I know he wasn't fond of doing them, but the studio was like, you have to.
When you think about that, though, later on in his career, anytime Chaplin would do a pie-in-the-face situation, it was almost a parody of what he had experienced beforehand, such as in Behind the Screen. I think they had a whole big pie fight at the end of that film, and I think what he was doing there was showing how manic the Keystone method was, and taking the Keystone method and
going
over the
late
top
as
with it, going
1940
extreme with it to
the
show
Great
how
Dictator,
ridiculous that it
even
was.
a big food fight thing
Right.
with the Mussolini caricature and the Hitler caricature. I think that was more to make fun of them than the ridiculousness of the pie throwing. So,
but the thing about behind the screen, it was so perfectly choreographed. It was like a dance with the pies. He never really got hit in the face with the pie.
Yeah.
It was just like so choreographed, and he did kind of make fun of Keystone's frantic kind of atmosphere or mood, and that's why I really think he stuck out in the Keystones, because they were mugging and doing their thing, and he was just very subtle. But yeah, he did make fun of Keystone's way of doing things.
And if we're calling back to Keystone, if you look at A Night Out, it's almost the Rounders.
He does many of the Essanays are just like the Keystones. They're just he fills them out more.
But I agree with that.
A lot of them. Well, yeah, because A Night Out is Mabel's Strange Predicament.
Yeah.
The pajamas almost verbatim to that film.
Yeah, there's a Edna Purviance fan page.
Linda Wada.
That exists on Facebook, and she's a really nice. I met her too at the Zanesville thing in Ohio. She posted a photo of Mabel in the pajamas in Mabel's Strange Predicament, which was the first film to feature the tramp that was filmed. And then she posted a photo right next to it of Edna in the same pajamas, and I never put those two things together until the photo was right in front of me.
I hope they will. You actually see the very first time that Charlie and Edna share the screen, and to me, it's instant chemistry. It's where Ben Turpin's trying to get into the motel room. Charlie's sitting on his butt, as he's bent over, and Edna comes in and he looks at her and she's flirting with him. But it's kind of, I can kind of see that instant chemistry. But most of the film, she's in pajamas.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah. There's been a couple of
how did Chaplin come across
stories,
Edna
but the one that's somebody knew. Well, he was looking for a leading lady, and he had been interviewing so many people, and somebody mentioned this very attractive girl that went to this cafe in San Francisco, and have lunch, and he just set up a meeting with her, and he said that she was she was getting over he said a love affair or a romance, and she was kind of very quiet and stuff. And he kind of doubted that she would be, good in the films, but he figured, she's attractive and, well, she was more than beautiful or pretty, and that, he would work with her.
It was a perfect Chaplin example of taking someone who had no experience in films and re-educating them into somebody that he could use.
It gave him the ability to mold her into the leading lady he wanted.
How authentic was the recreation of all that in the Richard Attenborough Chaplin film?
They had one scene with her.
Yeah. But you know what? There's actually pictures, so I'm sure that scenes were shot.
Yeah.
There's a picture of them kind of dancing. She has her hair long. It must have been for a film that they were filming. That's the only thing that I've ever seen outside of the 5 minutes in the film. That was terrible, in my opinion.
They do give accuracy with the scene in The Immigrant, in which she has to do that, eating the bowl of soup, I think.
Right, the beans, yeah.
And that is true. He did make that.
Yes.
Whether it's true or not, how they meet in the Chaplin film is funny, because she pulls this show with him, acting like she doesn't know who he is, and then as soon as he... Well, he doesn't even have to say. She pretty much plays him for the fool.
Quickly assume
that scene in the movie.
Immigrant is the first film she made with him, which isn't true. It was A Night Out, but
just like The Adventurer was the first Chaplin tramp film at Keystone. But if you don't know all the super intricate details about all this stuff, it's not anything that's gonna make you have a different interpretation of Chaplin. The little changes that they made for a 2.5 hour movie, you have to do some things like that just to save time. I don't think they mention at all. I mean, I think they go straight from him working with Essanay straight into him filming The Immigrant. So they don't even really mention any of that other stuff. It just kind of all blends in together. And that's why I've always had a real particular fondness with the early eras of Chaplin, because they seem to get so condensed when people are talking about them. They kind of mix all those Keystone, Essanay, and Mutual movies all into the same
the
era.
Early films, you talk about the period, his Keystones, his Essanay Mutuals. Wasn't until A Dog's Life that you actually started talking about the films, like A Dog's Life, Sunnyside. You don't refer to them as the First Nationals. So that's interesting that they refer to periods in his earlier films.
Maybe because the First Nationals were longer than the previous mutual. I mean, the Mutuals were starting to get longer versus the Essanays and the Keystone, which were like 1 or 2 reels.
Right.
So
First National, the first 1, 2, 3. I think the first 3 were 3-reelers. Yeah, you're right. That they were longer, so they were referred to the actual title of the film.
Besides The Bond. The Bond was a short film to get people to buy Liberty bonds.
The reason why I enjoy the Keystones and the Essanays so much is by the time he hit Mutual, he was a perfectionist. The Mutual films were perfectionist films from him. And what's interesting is, as far as the Keystones and Essanays are, is that they give you a little more insight on his working methods, because they weren't edited so drastically as he would do later on.
And
definitely,
they're more loose.
The thing is,
they're
I
looser
prefer
than anything that he would do
and
after
then
that.
on versus that's my opinion, versus the Keystone and Essanays, because I just prefer the plots better.
Right.
You can tell it's tightly written, and he just painlessly wrote over and over again the screenplay.
Right. But some of his Essanays are very, very good. But most of them, are kind of like the Keystones, but more rounded out.
Yeah.
Before I continue, I definitely want to mention that a lot of the knowledge that I have for the Essanays is reading James L. Nyberg's Chaplin at Essanay.
Okay.
That's the only book I've ever come across that really focuses on that period. And he breaks down each film. He talks about who was in it, the stories behind the scenes. I've read it numerous times, but I definitely want to mention that's where a lot of my knowledge comes from.
It's cool that there's a book specifically about the Essanay period, or just any specific period, versus the entire thing, his entire life, his entire career, which is over 50 years, or if you want to include his entire life, 80 some odd years. So.
And James actually did another book on his Keystones. And again, the same thing, breaks down every film, who was in it, the filming dates. And I refer to it a lot. It's like my Bible. But yeah, those 2 books I've read quite extensively. So I just want to make sure that I acknowledge that.
I'll have to pick those up. I know within the last 5-6 years there have probably been some really good Chaplin books that have come out. I've just been so busy with everything that back when I was in high school, I would get every Chaplin book from the library and read it back to front. And I know recently there's been more things that have been discovered about the making of these films and everything. And I really want to get in depth with those. I just need to find out when I'm going to find the time to read all this stuff. But going back to the early Essanays and even the Keystones, it's almost like watching the Steven Spielberg's student films, the films he made before he was the official Steven Spielberg that you know of. As far as you can see, dabbles of the brilliant things he would do later on in his career, just in little spurts in the earlier films, which is a lot of the reason why I find them interesting, because they're almost like a puzzle. They're almost like trying to figure out where he got, because he never forgot any ideas. So something he would hint at in an Essanay or a Keystone film is something that even 20, 30 years later he would remember and redo in a feature.
I can't remember which production company it was. Oh, no, it was called The Professor.
Right.
And then he used that, part of the body of that film and put it into limelight later on.
If you watch By the Sea, it's a little 1-reeler he did at the Pacific Ocean. And actually, I believe it was his last 1-reeler outside of the Bond. There is a part in it where he's picking the hair of somebody and he's trying to get across the guy has fleas. and he was kind of doing the flea thing with you're watching his eyes and the fleas are jumping from one hand to the next. I mean, it's very subtle, but yeah, he kept all of that in his head. Mm-hmm.
Now, going on to the next film in the Essanay catalog is The Champion, which, if we're going to draw parallels to Essanay and Keystone, even though this wasn't necessarily a Chaplin film at the Keystone era, Fatty Arbuckle's film, The Knockout,
and the thing is
which
that
Charlie plays
like a lot
the referee of the boxing match,
where somebody else was the star, after the reissues, they always made Charlie like he was the star of it. I've read that his part as a referee was like 2 or 3 minutes, but people
very
noticed
misleading.
him. Yep. That was the beauty of Chaplin, is he could have a tiny part in somebody else's film, but your eyes were drawn because he was subtle, but he was very funny, but your eyes were drawn to him.
Mm-hmm.
Even A Thief Catcher, I mean, I know that was just recently rediscovered, but up until the 30s when it supposedly went
5
missing,
minutes.
They were billing that as a Chaplin comedy. And he's only in it for maybe not even that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the movie itself is no longer than 12, 13 minutes, I don't think. But they were billing it as a Chaplin film. But, I mean, this is a little off topic, but how cool was it to see that?
It's like people forgot about that.
Chaplin
because
as a
when he
Keystone
mentioned
Cop.
it in later life, people are like, yeah, right, Charlie's getting old and, he thinks he was a Keystone Cop. So when that was discovered at, I believe, a flea market or a garage sale by Paul Gierke, I hope I have his name right, he found it, and he discovered, oh, my God, Chaplin as a Keystone Cop, and that was an amazing find.
Yeah, lucky him.
There's a really cool story on the Blu-ray Max Sennett set, which A Thief Catcher is a part of. And I find it ironic that 2 of the most obscure lost Chaplin films are the first of the shorts to be put out in the Blu-ray format. Recreation, which they found a new restoration of. Try to say that 3 times fast. Recreation Restoration. Because on the Keystone Chaplin set that was released a couple of years back, Flicker Alley, that's right, the print that they had for Recreation was atrocious, but it's all that they had at the time. And I guess a couple of years later, they come across a better print of it, so they included it on the Max Sennett Blu-ray set, which is fantastic. And if you watch A Thief Catcher with the audio commentary, he explains how he found this film almost by accident, how he was sitting on it for a long, long time, and one day he decided to check out and see what these films were that he bought, so he put it on his projector, and he's watching it, and he sees an image on the screen that he notices looks very familiar to him. And he said that it was early in the morning, so he wasn't quite sure how to take it, so he just took a little photo of it and sent it to a couple of friends of his that were in the know. And all he said was, "Is this who I think it is?"
Can you imagine the excitement of
the response
seeing
he got back
that
was,
must have been, beyond amazing, beyond amazing. And actually, Turner Classic actually showed Recreation. On August 14th, they had a 24-hour Chaplin Star of the Day, and they actually did show Recreation among his other films. So, yeah, that was cool. It was very pristine because, like you said, the edition that they had in Flicker Alley was atrocious, but like all of a sudden it cut to like the last couple of minutes and it was like pristine. So yeah, this one now is completely pristine, the Recreation.
Neat.
Yeah, if you are into this kind of stuff, that Max Sennett set is a definite must-buy, and I hope they make many more of them, because it's not only did they have the films on there of Sennett's, but they had This Is Your Life, Max Sennett, and all these bonus features. You could lose yourself in all that stuff.
Right.
But going back on topic to Essanay, it's so easy to get mistracked on all this stuff. So we're talking about The Champion. To me, if I had to say there was a pivotal point where the early Chaplin started to blend into the later Chaplin that we would know,
the thing about
I see a lot of hints of this in
I love
The Champion.
finding, the first time he does something. And The Champion is the very first time that Edna and him share an on-screen kiss. So that has like some special significance. At the end of it or in the middle of it, where they go to kiss and he puts the beer jug, which he was using, drinking beer as he was training for the fight, which was funny. It was really funny.
Do you have any specific favorite moments from the Champion outside of that scene?
In his glove and just like hits like the big buff guy, just so he can box in the ring. I just think it's kind of stupid, but in a funny kind of way.
And
wasn't this the film where they open it up and Chaplin's sitting with the dog?
He had a dog in 3 of his films. One of them was A Night in the Cabaret with Mabel Normand, and he has this little sausage dog, and he's taking it for a walk. They didn't interact too much. The thing about that dog, his name was Spike. If I remember correctly, I mean, it's not funny. He actually got hit by a car like a couple of weeks after, the filming. The thing I like about that, the dog really could care less about Charlie, because as he's handing him the hot dog, the dog's like, he needs to have it seasoned. And the funniest part between them is Charlie's going out in the ring and he fears he's not going to make it back, and he goes to shake the dog's hand, and it's an English bulldog, so they kind of have that face, they're real sad, and the dog's like, to me, the dog's like, whatever. That's how I read it. The dog could care less, which is different than Scraps.
Well, you have to think about, too, when, animals, especially back then, were involved in film. Right. There's so many things that they're looking at. Cameramen, people walking back and forth. They're distracted.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
I highly doubt that dog was comfortable in any situation they were putting him in. Outside of that one Keystone film, this is the first time that Chaplin really had any kind of interaction with any kind of dog. Yeah, so I never even thought about that. So that's, in and of itself, another connection to later Chaplin,
where
as far as things that he would evolve later on into other films, such as A Dog's Life.
Each other. They needed each other, where in that film, the dog really...
He was just there.
He could care less, like, whatever. Charlie seemed more attached to the dog. The dog was to him.
Yeah.
Talking about the Champion, it's interesting because I was showing Sarah and Ann the other day this video that I got sent by a friend. I didn't even know it existed personally. It's this actress named Minerva Courtney, and she did a little short film that was basically parodying the Champion.
She's impersonating him, and she is
I wouldn't say she parodies it. She more or less just remakes
whenever
it.
she was walking away from the camera, her back towards the camera, just doing the tramp walk, I was impressed. I'm like, is that her or is it Chaplin?
Right, yeah. And the thing that she does with the cane behind her back to try to keep the dog in line, like he would not hit the dog, but pat the dog with the cane, to keep him in line with him, and she did that, which was, pretty funny. But yeah, a lot of people didn't know about that for a really, really long time. So so that's interesting, because in 1915 is when Chaplinitis, as they called it, he exploded in that time period. So Chaplin was everywhere, and people were impersonating him. I mean, he was like the most known person on the planet, so that's really interesting that you get to see, like, that the people were starting to impersonate him.
And he had only been doing movies for 1 year. It's just amazing, with the internet and everything now, how things can blow up so quickly. Right. But back in 1914, the fact that somebody, an entertainer, could practically take over the world in 1 year
they were all men.
is astonishing.
It's so neat to see a woman impersonate Chaplin, pretty much spot on. So I thought that was really intriguing. Yeah, I tried to find stuff. And
I would
the only
love
thing
to see
that I
more
saw
of
was
her
the
films. I can't really find much more information on her.
She's hard to find.
Yeah, not too much information about her, but she'll live on just from that one film, which is, really cool.
That's a good legacy to have.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so the next Keystone film in the set
I want to add a little bit of just FYI. In The Champion, it was the last film that Ben Turpin and Charlie Chaplin were in, together. Ben Turpin has a tiny part as like a peanut vendor. The other film that we were talking off camera about or whatever, Carmen, he was in it, but that was not a Chaplin-endorsed segment. And G.M. Anderson actually, I believe, is sitting in the audience of the Champion. And so he did that for Chaplin, and then Chaplin did a part in a GM movie called Regeneration. He did a little part like in a little dance, a dance hall. It's not really known that much about, but that was kind of like he was, doing GM a favor because GM went into, the little audience in the Champion.
Mm-hmm.
And before we get too far into these films, someone who
And
I forgot to mention, who
Leo
was in
White
all of the ones we just talked about, was Leo White.
That directed all the padded scenes with Carmen, but Charlie didn't seem to hold a grudge against him. Because after Carmen, he did some of the mutuals, and then Charlie actually used him as late as The Great Dictator as a barber. So I thought that was really cool. It really showed part of how Charlie is, because a lot of people try to say he was a tyrant, he was, egomaniac, but I thought, that was really cool that he didn't really blame him, kind of knowing that Leo White was an employee and the employer was telling him, this is what, I want you to do. So I thought that was cool.
Chaplin was pretty loyal to his fellow cast members, his troupe, as they call them, which is pretty neat. For instance, he kept Edna Purviance on payroll up until her death in 1958, which is just really cool how committed he was to them.
Considering that a lot of people, which is kind of true, he was very frugal. He didn't throw money around except for his films. So for him to do that really means a lot more than somebody that would just arbitrarily throw money around.
Well, if you look at Leo White's filmography, too, he's got some pretty stellar examples here of things he was involved in. There's the 1925
he's
Ben
in
Hur.
That as
There's
the
Yankee Doodle Dandy, Casablanca.
Myrna Loy actually called him Leo, and he came and she wanted like 5 martinis to make up for the fact that her husband, William Powell, had already had like 10, which was funny. And I was like, oh, wow, is that Leo White? So that was pretty cool.
Well, I feel like when Charlie found someone he was compatible with as far as working with, he would use them for as long as he could, because he didn't have to teach anyone anything.
Went to KB,
they already knew his methods.
Film company or studio, which actually Billy West was a Chaplin impersonator, and he did a lot of...
Yeah,
and he actually used to put curlers in his hair to get it curly.
The most famous one of all, pretty much,
and Leo White actually went to work for him. So again, Charlie didn't seem to harbor ill will towards him. So that was cool.
And since we're talking about Leo White, another person's name popped up in my memory that we should probably talk about, who he met at Essanay, a specific cameraman.
Where they started working together. Let's see, Raleigh was working at Essanay, I think, for Billy Anderson. But in Chaplin, the film, it looks like Raleigh was working at Keystone.
Or Fox Mulder.
Oh, wow, okay, yeah.
That's the first time I remember ever seeing David Duchovny.
Oh, yes, that was in 92, so yeah, that was
before the X-Files. So for anyone who's not familiar with what we're talking about, in the Robert Downey Jr. Chaplin biopic, Raleigh Totherow is played by David Duchovny, pre-X-Files fame. He would later, I think X-Files came out the next year, but he was a relatively unknown at the time, so that's a cool little thing. People are always really surprised to see David Duchovny in the film, because you're not thinking, because they hardly mention him, and you're not thinking about him until he pops up on the screen. So when Chaplin met Raleigh, did he start filming on his new job, or was there a specific Essanay where him and Chaplin started working together?
But he worked for, I think, G.M. Anderson. He never did a film with Chaplin. The first film they did together was The Floor Walker, because Raleigh had left Essanay and Chaplin met up with him, and Chaplin said, oh, why don't you come on board the Mutuals? But he met him in Niles after Charlie left Chicago. So that's where they met. But as far as actually working together, it was the Mutuals.
Mm-hmm.
So most all of his classic stock company that you think of when you think of Chaplin, all somehow assembled during the Essanay period of 1915. Okay, so we'll talk about In the Park real quick, which the film In the Park, which is the next on the Essanay roster of films, isn't particularly noteworthy.
Party girl
To me, it
and
feels
a
like
policeman.
just another
Right,
heart
yeah,
comedy
definitely.
that
Yeah,
Charlie
it
had to
wasn't
churn out
anything.
and get released.
I mean, there's a cute little flirtation scene between him and Edna. She plays like a little nursemaid, and he's flirting. He's doing the little hat tipping thing, but as far as anything, substantial, it's just a random. But people loved it. Anything Chaplin put out, they loved. So
As long as the tramp was in it.
yes, yes.
You have to remember, though, too, that Charlie was trying to hone his craft and make better quality films that he knew he could make, but at the same time, he was working at a studio that required him to churn out a certain amount of movies per month or per week or whatever. So while he was working on something that he really was pouring a lot of passion into, he had to, at the same time, make a little throwaway comedy to just get out there to keep his name and to fulfill his contract. And In the Park is one of those films.
He had done 3 films by March 11th, which is when The Champion came out. Essanay, I think, wanted 1 film a month, so he was already behind the ball, so he just threw that out.
And that's pretty much, In the Park is
there was
pretty
a lot
much
of,
interchangeable
there was a lot of
with
them,
any
so
of the
he had a
Park
lot
Keystone
of,
films
material,
that he was doing a year beforehand.
to work with.
Now, moving forward here, the next Chaplin Keystone is Jitney Elopement.
I think that might have been the only
I
one.
can't think of another Chaplin film before this where there was a car chase involved.
I wonder if he was actually driving, because purportedly he was not a very good driver. And he was moving at breakneck speed, so that ending was really interesting. It was like a little dance. It was so like choreographed. Yeah, that's like one of the highlights in the film. And he also does a little bit, supposedly when he was on the stage with Carno, he did this little thing with a roll, like he had a roll and he kind of cut it and it made it into a little accordion. And he had done that on the stage. And you could just see him in the movie when he's sitting at the table with Edna and her father, and he's just going around and around, and then he just kind of plays with it like it's an accordion.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, now that we've rounded out a first few of his films from Essanay, let's talk about the impact that these films had.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier the whole Chaplinitis thing, which is pretty much Beatlemania of 1915.
Site where I get a lot of my information is lantern.org, and they have digitalized all of these magazines. So if you want to download them, you get them in a super great quality. And if you look at those magazines, Charlie's on so many covers. This one magazine, Picture Play Weekly, I mean, in that one year, he was on numerous covers, and you read the articles, and it was Chaplinitis, and they had little contests for Chaplin, impersonators. Mm-hmm. They were selling Chaplin little trinkets and novelty. And I don't think he was ever able to stay on top of going after people to say, you know what, you're making money off of my stuff. But they definitely call that time period Chaplinitis. He just exploded.
When you think about modern celebrities and the structure that's set up as far as a younger person being a big star, Chaplin was really the first one under 30 to achieve this kind of worldwide celebrity. Now, I mean, I may be wrong about that, but as far as I know, thinking back, there's really no one else. And it's ironic when you think the only reason Max Sennett hired Chaplin was because he thought he was an older man because of the makeup and costume they had on stage when you saw him.
Right.
So knowing that Charlie was 24 years old at the time, Sennett probably would have never hired him.
Was not valued in entertainment. It was kind of like, the older people have been there honing their craft. So and I think Chaplin was actually the first to ever reach that global, phenomenon.
He was really, truly the first movie star of all time that I can think of.
Oh, but yes, you're right. Definitely, there was nobody before him that achieved the worldwide status.
Mm-hmm. She and Chaplin were competitors.
What about Mary
at the box
Pickford?
office.
Didn't she
they were
predate Chaplin as far as celebrity status?
Box office stars at the time. So even though they were friends, or I guess mutual friends because of Douglas Fairbanks, they had a friendly competition going on. Or
I think though in that period where we're talking about, I don't think Mary Pickford was the worldwide. The thing about Chaplin is he went global in a very short, most, like Mary Pickford and stuff, probably started, in the United States eventually, yeah, that they rivaled each other for salary and stuff. But in that period, I don't think Mary Pickford had, because most of the films that I see that she's, that are famous for were like 1916.
Okay.
I could be mistaken.
When you trace back the youth-based culture that's so important now in society, I see Chaplin as the first hint of what would later come as far as Elvis and the Beatles and all that kind of stuff that happened later on. That was the first worldwide entertainment phenomenon that I can really
Elvis Presley and the Beatles
figure
as
out.
far as, exploding. And I think Elvis Presley was 22?
Yeah,
he was, was really young.
And we could do a whole episode on Chaplin impersonators and Billy West and all the legal issues that were caused or created because of the situations that happened with Chaplin and his celebrity. I even recall seeing a couple cartoons that the guy who did Felix the Cat was doing Chaplin cartoons. Chaplin's Elephant or Chaplin's White Elephant is one
Billy
of those.
West was?
And if I'm not mistaken, that was made in 1915 as well.
I think, they just came out with a documentary last year, Birth of the Tramp, and it was actually shown on Turner Classics, but it first was shown in France. And there's a part in that film where the tramp is, coming down the stairs and he's jumping on a trampoline. And there's another little scene in it. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, that's Billy West.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, did they put that out there on purpose? Or did they not realize that was Chaplin? You know what I'm saying? It's really interesting because I was like, wait, that's Billy West. Because the little tiny clip before him jumping on the trampoline, I'm looking at the characters. They were upstairs, and I was like, that looks like some of the people that were in the Billy West films. So that was really interesting.
Yeah.
Just imagine Charlie's reaction to, because back then, legalities and copyright were not what they are today. So imagine Chaplin walking down the street
Billy West
and seeing,
even so far
a Billy
as
West
the cast
film being played at the theater.
That emulated Eric Campbell, which Oliver Hardy played in those, and a woman, I can't think of her name, that played like an Edna character. So he was really, he was nervy, but people liked him. He didn't put his films out as he's Charlie Chaplin. It was like Billy West, but he was so convincing as Charlie.
Wasn't there another impersonator at the time who called himself Charlie Applin?
He was the person
just
that
took
Chaplin
the C
finally
off
had
and
enough, and
capitalized
in
the
1927 he took him to court, got a sanction that he couldn't do that anymore. But yeah, a lot of them were very convincing.
And it's amazing considering how many films Chaplin was putting out at the time. There was still so much of a demand that other actors, other performers were making their own Chaplin comedies that were competing with
I don't know if they
the actual
knew that
Chaplin
they were
films.
getting, fake Chaplin, but like you said, they just wanted people to come in and spend money.
Well, we're going to wrap this episode up. We're definitely going to have to do a two-parter for the SNAs because there's a lot more we want to get into. Not only just the films, the rest of the films we have to talk about, but a lot of the business situations that occurred between Chaplin and SNA. At the same time, I do want to take this time. It is also the 100th anniversary of A Birth of a Nation, which came out in 1915. So anyone that's never seen that film, it's considered the first feature-length film, and it was directed by D.W. Griffith, and a very controversial film for obvious reasons, and a very flawed film, but at the same time, I feel like no one's really giving the anniversary the respect that it deserves, just because of the negative aspects
and for a silent movie,
associated with it.
That is kind of hard to watch and sit through. The sad thing about Birth of a Nation is that there were so many technological and cinematography advances and innovations for that movie, like night filming, using an optic lens, or I'm not sure what the terms are, but it was very innovative. Unfortunately, all those innovations had to go to a very controversial and racist plot. So
the thing that I think is very important is we need to always look at this thing in a historical perspective. You have to look at it, the times that were going on. It's deplorable, but you have to be able to look at the history of anything. You have to look beyond that, because we can't, that's censoring.
The thing about Birth of a Nation was, even then, it was being protested by NAACP members. And the funny thing is, The Birth of a Nation is the very first film shown at the White House under Woodrow Wilson's presidency. And Woodrow Wilson is even quoted from one of his books in Birth of a Nation, because he was from Stanton, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had his history with the Civil War growing up, Reconstruction, just like D.W. Griffith. And I watched an interview between D.W. Griffith and a friend of his,
Mm-hmm.
asking about the Birth of a Nation in, I believe, 1930. And
Right.
D.W. Griffith kind of schmoozily says, what is truth? For him, that was his truth.
The thing is that you can't get away from the fact that it did cause the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes, it did.
And in the documentaries, Hollywood, that Kevin Brownlow did, it was like 12-parter. There's his director that directed that film said that, DW was told that there was riots going on, and the director said that D.W. Griffith, was like, well, he didn't care, about the riots. But that's just, we don't know if he actually said that. But it's definitely, you have to look at things in a historical perspective, because there's a lot in silent era that was politically incorrect, and the important thing is that we've evolved since then.
I have to say that the Lincoln assassination scene in that movie is the best part to me of that movie, and the restored version that Kino put out has a really awesome soundtrack score. It's the best portrayed version of that.
Right. The
historical
Lincoln thing,
incident
definitely,
that I've ever
but
seen
I mean,
on film.
he definitely
and it's surprisingly because it doesn't even need words.
What he imagined if African Americans actually took over the government. So yeah, again, you have to look at it a historical perspective, despite the fact that you might find some of the subject matter distasteful, because D.W. definitely was innovative, and he, did a lot of different things in films, and he actually had the first, like you said, it's a very long film. They definitely probably had an intermission.
Yeah, it's an epic for sure.
Yes, yes.
Birth of a Nation was the first film to take the medium of film out of the Nickelodeons and the association with the lower class audiences,
and that's when
brought
silent film,
the medium of film into the high culture.
Chaplin. Once he was started being noticed by the upper echelons of people, then he really took off. But yeah, you're right. It took it out of the little storefront movie theaters that were actually death traps, but that's a whole other subject matter.
The only problem I can find with the Kino Blu-ray edition of Birth of a Nation is there's no commentary on it. And any DVD version I've ever seen released of that film has never had a full-length commentary. And I feel like if there's any movie that could use a commentary track for it,
I think
it would be Birth of a Nation. Just explain every scene and explain
website for streaming. And that's where I saw the D.W. Griffith interview at the very beginning, and then at intermission they have the interview again, but more different questions, which is, it's very, very 1930. I'll say that.
D.W. Griffith, his father actually was in the Civil War, and his father died from injuries from the war, so he definitely had his own perspective, as deplorable as you might find it.
Yeah, his father would be talking with his Civil War buddies, comrades at the table, while D.W. Griffith was sitting there hearing all these stories of battles and just the pride they felt for the Confederacy.
Right.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Now, tying Griffith into Chaplin, obviously later on they will go and create United Artists together. Mm-hmm. But you have to look at how D.W. Griffith polarized African Americans versus how Chaplin did, which is almost the opposite.
Yeah,
Chaplin
like
very
pointing
rarely
fun
used
at.
African Americans
There's
as
only one
a source
film, but it
of
was a Senate film
stereotype
where
humor.
there's a man as a doorman that's in blackface. But I don't believe that Charlie actually had any, say in a lot of the things with Senate.
Because Chaplin is
there's an
British,
actor in blackface
I think it makes a
in the
difference
audience.
with how he portrays African Americans versus his American counterparts in film.
Yeah, you're probably right.
All right. Well, thanks for the awesome discussion. This is a great conversation. We definitely hit on all the points I wanted to talk about, and we didn't get through even half of the Essanay films, but that's okay. If you'd like to head over to the Facebook page and tell us what your favorite Chaplin Essanay film is, or your favorite moment from one of those films, at the same time, I look forward to continuing our conversation next episode about the Chaplin Essanay films, and we'll get into a lot of nitty-gritty regarding Chaplin and Essanay, which is really interesting and really shows how the movie industry worked and how they got through a lot of the legal loopholes that would be closed up.
All right.
Bye. Thank you.
All right. We'll hope to join us next time, and thanks so much for listening to the Modern Times podcast
this was a long
again.
one.
That was
All right.
an hour
Bye-bye.
and 20 minutes.